Hello and welcome to the Field Guides. I'm Bill and I'm here with Daniel. Good morning, Daniel.
Good morning, Bill.
And what we're going to do today and over the course of many future episodes is give you the experience of what it's like to be in the woods, in the field, and on the trail. Each month we pick a natural history topic, research the science behind that topic, and then take you out to a natural spot and share everything that we've learned. And the natural spot we are in today is nothing like where we normally are. So folks, thanks to patrons and supporters of the podcast, Daniel and I are in southern Florida. We are in Everglades National Park. We are currently walking through the Pine Lands, just a little bit away from the Big Pine Key Campground.
The Long Pine Key Campground.
Thank you.
Which is the campground at the Homestead entrance into Everglades National Park, and that's my favorite campground in the park.
So Daniel has been down here for, a week?
I was at the Big Cypress National Preserve in southwest Florida for about a week, and then I picked up Bill and some friends at the airport at Fort Lauderdale, and now we are here in Everglades National Park.
And Daniel was down here for those days before he picked up myself and the rest of our group, and you were looking for?
Today's target species, which is none other than the state animal of Florida itself, the Florida Panther.
The Florida Panther. So that's who we're looking for today. And our chances of actually finding nil?
Yeah, pretty much.
But we are hopeful. Danny, I'm sure you'll talk about this during the episode, but Daniel did see some sign, right?
I did,
yeah.
And had a potential encounter, but yeah, we can get into that later on.
So let's describe the landscape around us, because for once, we are not a half an hour away from Buffalo, standing in second growth forest.
Yeah.
The Pine Lands, folks, this is an area dominated by a species called South Florida slash pine, and it's a relatively open forest around us right now. The slash pine, also called Dade County pine, right, does not get real big. It's what? I mean, the tallest ones around us are maybe, 30 feet?
30 feet, yeah.
But the undergrowth, it's a relatively open forest, but the undergrowth is dominated by herbaceous plants, small palms. And this is a habitat that relies on fire. So fire has to move through here every now and then to knock back all the lower vegetation, because otherwise it will turn into a completely different habitat, the hardwood hammock, dominated by hardwood species. Down here in Florida, it is so different from our typical stomping grounds. Here, a change in elevation of just 6 inches or a foot can create a completely different habitat. So,
yeah, and that's why the Everglades is my favorite place on earth, because you can start at the Long Pine Key Campground and drive 30 miles and see so many different habitats, so many different species, so much different wildlife. Yeah. So the diversity for just one place is amazing.
It is amazing. Yeah. And yesterday, while we were driving or hiking, you were talking about how growing up, you thought of the Everglades just as, open kind of
like a marsh, just like a wet area dominated by grasses or sedges or something, just like one big wet area. And when I tell people that I love to camp in the Everglades, they'd respond with, how do you pitch a tent when there's just water everywhere? Because they don't understand that there are so many different ecosystems within Everglades National Park that you can hike. It's not all water, but you can paddle as well, you can camp. It's a great place. It's about 1.5 million acres, and you will have awesome wildlife encounters when you come here. I've never been disappointed here, not a single day.
It's not just mosquitoes and swamps, right? Yeah.
Well, if you come in the wet season, the mosquitoes will be a little bit more, but
That's
you're
true.
Exactly right.
We are here, it's early January 2024. This is supposed to be the dry season.
And I'm glad you said supposed to be, because we've been dealing with a lot of rain, and this is, at least in my trips, I've never seen the water levels like this here.
Water levels are high. So typically during the dry season, it's a great time to come down here because the bugs aren't as bad. But also, since the water isn't high in most areas, wildlife congregates in the areas where there is still water.
Correct.
So typically during the dry season, it's easier to see wildlife.
Absolutely. Yeah, the amount of American alligators you see and the wading birds and such is directly correlated to the water levels.
But that being said, we were kind of concerned that we weren't going to see a ton of wildlife, and we have had amazing folks. Yesterday we got to see 2 barred owls mating,
like right next to us. Yeah, one flew to the other and almost ran into Bill's face. Yeah.
So we should say some photographers had called them in, right?
It appeared that way because the way the one barred owl flew directly at the photographer, and then we did see him calling. I'm not sure if they found the owls and then called, but that might have been why they mated, because they might have heard his calling and seen that as like a competition or trying to do a mating call.
So you were saying that the owls came in and maybe one of the owls thought that the person was a prospective mate.
Yes.
So they were trying to kind of stake their claim, like, no, I'm going to mate with this owl first. And
that thought came about because I remember Chuck Rosenberg, who we've mentioned on the podcast several times as being just the owl guru.
Yeah.
When he did, I think it was the first ever owl prowl at Rhinestone Woods, and he attempted to call them barred owls. One landed right in front of him, and then another one came and mated with that owl right there. So it was similar circumstances. So we just wondered if that was the cause behind that, but it was awesome.
It was incredible.
Yeah.
And
daytime too. I mean, just like right in front of us, broad daylight, got great
right
photos.
along the road.
Yeah.
Yeah. So folks, if you can come on down here, check out the Everglades, especially during the dry season if you can.
Emphasis on that.
So we should tell people, when is the dry season typically?
It begins and there's always variation and such. Around like November is when the dry season starts, and then in like April is when the wet season begins. Around April, May.
Okay.
So.
And I should point out to folks, because it just popped in my head, we did invite Steve to come down. We wish Steve could be here with us, but Steve has a lot going on, so he couldn't make it down with us. So you just get Daniel and I today.
Oh, I'm sorry, guys.
It's going to be great. So we are going to be hiking down this Pineland Trail here, focusing mostly on the Florida Panther. And for once, this is an episode I have not done very much research for, so Daniel's going to be doing most of the talking today. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions, trying to provide the color commentary, making the quick-witted comments that Steve is usually responsible for.
That's where we miss Steve.
That's right. But I'm sure we'll be talking about a lot of other stuff along the way. Because, again, there's just so much to see, so much to find out here in the Everglades. So.
Yeah, and who knows what we'll encounter on this trail.
Exactly.
I've seen hawks on this trail, deer, and we found what we have believed in the past to be panther scat on this trail. So you never know what we're going to see.
All right, so let's walk a little bit.
All right.
And, we said that our chances of seeing a Florida Panther were likely nil, but why is that?
Well, there's a few different reasons behind that. One is that they are critically endangered. So later when we talk a little bit more about their conservation, there's not a lot of them. The current population estimates are anywhere from like 150 to 200. And the Everglades itself is not great habitat for them. So while they are here, and especially in the pinelands where we are now, they don't really like the lack of tree cover and the wetness that encompasses more of the Everglades. And that is why I went to the Big Cypress National Preserve in southwest Florida. You have more tree cover there, you have a higher prey abundance, and at places like the Fakahatchee Strand and the northwest portion of the Big Cypress Preserve, you have a lot more Florida panther. Now even there, where there's a lot more of them, your odds of seeing them are very slim. So I remember Mike Owens, who we mentioned is the biologist at Fakahatchee.
Was the biologist.
Unfortunately,
he retired. Yeah. Good for him. But.
Good for him, bad for everybody else that goes to Fakahatchee. But he mentioned, I think, if I can remember correctly, when I was reading on the website, he said that he saw like 20 of them in 20 years or something like that. He averaged like one a year.
That's still pretty good.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
Like, that's amazing. But he's out there all the time.
Right.
So
the more time you spend, the more likely you are to see it, right?
Yeah.
So just thinking, from the listener perspective, how is the Florida Panther different from people I'm sure have heard of mountain lions and pumas? And so I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast before, but let's get that out of the way.
Yes, my plan was to start with that because a lot of people have heard of Florida Panther. It is like a charismatic animal. You mentioned it's the state animal of Florida.
There's a sports team named after it.
Yeah, there's a sports team named after it. And there's a lot of drama and controversy and litigation regarding the panther, but a lot of people don't really know what it is. And like a lot of people think that Florida Panthers are black. When I told my parents that I was going to go on this trip and I was showing them pictures that people have taken of Florida Panther, they're like, what? That looks like a mountain lion. I thought they were black. The quick, simplified answer to what's the difference between the mountain lions that people are more familiar with out west and our Florida Panthers is essentially where they live.
Right.
Yeah.
But they do look virtually
look
the same.
Yeah. They are, and we'll get into subspecies later when we get into taxonomy. I don't want to jump into that now.
Okay.
But mountain lions, cougars, Florida panther, pumas, they're all the same species. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a lot of people don't realize that.
It's like woodchuck and groundhog.
Different. Yeah.
Just different common names for the same animal.
Different common names for the same animal.
Okay.
So and that was kind of like a shout out to the timber rattlesnake episode we just did. And we mentioned that canebrake rattlesnake was the name for the population in the southeast. Florida panthers referred to the pumas that live in Florida. Mm-hmm. And they are the only breeding population east of the Mississippi River.
And
so they are unique.
Right now they are just in the Florida Peninsula, right?
The breeding population, yes. Yeah. So when we talk about their behavior a bit, they can wander.
Okay.
And, they can leave the state. So
They are allowed.
they are allowed. They are allowed.
Well, I should say they're able.
They're able.
Yeah.
So the Florida Panther is a large carnivorous cat species. They're usually described as tawny, which is like an orangish brown color. I say like a deer.
Yeah.
They
No,
look
that's
like
a good
the same
comparison,
color
yeah.
as a deer. But there can be some color variation that includes like a palish brown or rusty upper parts, and they usually have like a dull white or buffy undercarriage. They have a long tail, which is like nearly half the total length of the cat, so that's a big feature for identification, and it's like dark brown or blackish at the tip. The back of the ears and the sides of the nose are also dark brown or blackish, and they have large dagger sharp retractable claws like other cats, and canine teeth that are about 1.25 inches. So they got some serious hardware to them.
And they just want to eat you, right?
Yeah, well, there has never been a documented attack on a human from a Florida Panther, unlike other pumas in other places of the United States.
That's just your tree hugger propaganda. We know they're out there killing people left and right, right?
If that was the case, I would have been a lot more nervous during my nocturnal stakeouts for them by myself in the Big Cypress backcountry.
Well, I can't tell you how many people, when I said, I'm going down to Florida, what are you going down to Florida for? To look for Florida Panthers. Universally, the reaction was, aren't you worried? Aren't you?
No.
And I had to be like, no, I'm really not worried at all. Because one, I don't even think we're going to see one.
Yeah.
But secondly, no, they're not really looking at people as something to eat. So.
Yes. But that was the weird kind of mental thing going on in my head. I was like, well, they've never attacked anyone before. But if they were, some guy out in the middle of the woods at night, crouching down, looking small and a little bit more vulnerable,
like you,
would probably be the case. Yeah, because that's what I was doing. But again, odds of seeing one are astronomically small, and it's never happened. So
yeah,
my mind was at ease.
And that was it's never happened with a Florida Panther.
With the Florida Panther,
right.
Yes.
Because there are obviously documented mountain lion attacks in other parts of the country.
And deaths.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
So, and speaking of that, the one kind of distinction is that the Florida Panthers tend to be a little bit smaller than a lot of the Pumas out west, and that's usually because of the hotter climates.
Sure.
So I think you might have talked about that in another episode, the benefits of having a smaller mass when you're in warmer climates, hotter climates.
There is a name for that.
There is.
Named after a researcher, a biologist or something. Yeah, I don't remember what. We'll put it in the episode notes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So males do grow larger than the females. The average grown adult male is about 120 pounds, but the largest ones can exceed 150 pounds, so that's a big cat. And they can measure nearly 7 feet long from the nose to the tip of their tail.
7 feet long.
7
Okay, but
feet long.
the tail is pretty long.
The tail, yeah, but the tail is very long.
All right, so hang on, because
Yeah.
we came
Maybe
to
we should go left
a
here.
part in the trail here that's virtually flooded. So,
That high water, man.
folks, just as we're kind of making our way around this puddle, before Daniel can get kind of in mic range again, most of the substrate here is limestone. So again, it's so different from where we're normally hiking, because it almost looks like sand mixed with very light colored stone.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, is most of what we're walking on here once you get to areas where it's not covered by vegetation. So again, it's just like being in a completely different environment from what we're used to.
Yeah, and then we can take a 10-minute drive down the road and see something totally different
That's right.
from this.
Yeah.
So, the adult females will usually weigh around 50 pounds, but they can exceed 100, and they normally measure around like 6 feet long, is around the biggest that they'll get. Now, if you read about Florida Panther, you might read things like they have a cowlick on the hair of their back and a crooked tail.
I did come, yeah.
You came across that? That is not a physical feature to distinguish them from other pumas. That is the result of inbreeding.
That's when I came across that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. When they have found genetically healthier specimens, and after certain measures that they've taken to improve the genetic diversity of the population, they did not find that as much.
Okay.
Baby Florida Panthers, or they're called kittens, they have these distinctive spots on them. Have you ever seen pictures of them? They're so cute, and they got these blue eyes.
We watched the documentary, which I'm sure you'll mention.
Oh yeah.
That was the first time I got to see them. Yeah.
Oh. Those dots or spots on them help with camouflage because they're hanging out on the floor of the forest.
They are adorable.
They really are. And it helps them disappear amongst the vegetation there. They disappear by 6 months.
I feel like they're, if you see a panther cub, it's like seeing a bear cub, where they're so incredibly adorable, but the fact that you're seeing one also kind of strikes terror because you know there's probably a protective mom somewhere very close by.
So in the book that I read, that was kind of an analysis of a lot of the studies that took place in panther captures. When they've located dens, you know, the mother would run off and they would find the kittens. It was always in the back of their mind, like, is it gonna come out? And they were saying that they never felt threatened from a mother panther, and they thought the mother knew enough, like, if I lose my kittens, I can recycle again and make more. If I die and the kittens die,
right?
You know, so they are protective, but to a certain extent.
Okay.
Yeah. So they didn't feel like they were going to get killed by going in there. But there was also multiple of them, so who knows? The one thing that I want to mention is that there is another carnivorous cat species down here, the bobcat.
Yeah.
And there can be, although the bobcats are a lot smaller, they're like 35. They can be like 35 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
They are a lot smaller. And their tail is a lot shorter. Those are kind of the two biggest distinctions.
Hence the name Bob.
Hence the name Bobcat.
Because it looks like it's bobbed. Yeah.
A lot of panther sightings end up being bobcat.
I mean, that happens a lot because someone sees something at a distance.
Exactly.
It's hard to judge size, and those people are convinced it was a panther.
I can't state enough the significance of misidentifications in the field.
Right.
And it's so easy. Lighting, it's hard to tell size at a distance.
Totally.
And people don't understand that.
Right.
And you know, I heard an example, a picture was taken of a bobcat and it looked a lot like a panther. It was in Florida, but when they analyzed it, the trailing leg of the bobcat from the angle where the photo was taken made it look like a long tail. So I mean, these things, and that was a photo, so like, you know, prove that. But if you see that out there and it's the
for
evening,
a split second,
that can certainly happen.
That's why every bear sighting, the bear's 700 pounds.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And every deer's a 10-point buck, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So and then
we're all guilty of it.
And I know that because there's times I see a bird and I swear it's one species. I take a picture of it, I zoom in later, and it's absolutely not. So
the bald eagle becomes a chickadee, right?
So that brings me then to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which I mentioned earlier, the black panther phenomenon.
I honestly had not heard of this until I started doing some reading for the episode, and I'm thinking, really?
I looked into that a little bit because I did want to deconstruct that. Usually when you hear black panther, it's referring to the dark-coated variants of jaguars and leopards due to melanism. So the overproduction of melanin, you know, that dark pigment there. These two cats belong to the genus Panthera, and they're normally called black panthers. So the Florida Panther, which is not really seen, not a lot known about it for most people, you hear panther and you think black cat.
Okay.
You know, the Carolina Panthers, the NFL football team, I'm not sure what exact species their logo is supposed to represent. Yeah, but they do feature a black cat. Luckily, though, the Florida Panthers that we mentioned earlier, the NHL hockey team, their logo correctly depicts a tawny-colored cat. But in the book that I read, it said they almost had a black cat to feature their logo. And man, that would have been embarrassing, huh?
So the Florida Panther, that is not in the Panthera genus, right?
No, their genus is Puma.
Okay.
And that's where that name comes from.
Right.
So we're going to kind of continue to deconstruct the Black Panther thing, and then we're going to hop into range and taxonomy.
Awesome.
So that was a pretty good little segue there. What also makes that issue more prevalent are these alleged, you know, emphasis on alleged, sightings of large black cats or black panthers in the southeast and in the south. And some folks chalk those up as melanistic Florida panthers.
Oh, okay. So it's a Florida Panther. It just happens to look black because it has melanism.
Yes, but the problem with that is there has never been a documented case of melanism in any puma, ever.
Okay.
But it has been documented in bobcats.
So they're seeing bobcats,
so they
thinking it's a black panther.
They could
be
seeing a large bobcat, maybe a large dog, maybe a Florida panther in poor lighting, or even a black bear. I mean, these things happen.
Or maybe they're just high or drunk.
Yeah, they're having a good time out in the woods.
Right.
Yeah. But I don't want to totally rule out the possibility of seeing a melanistic jaguar or leopard that has escaped from like the illegal cat trade, especially when you're down here in South Florida.
Where I should say everything can survive.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's hard to say something's impossible when you're down here in Florida.
So I just want to be sure for the listener, you may have mentioned this and I missed it, but the jaguar and the other species, those two species you mentioned in the Panthera genus, they are not here naturally in southern Florida.
They are not, but another kind of caveat for that, I don't know a lot about jaguars, but I know that occasionally they have strayed into the south central United States.
Through
like
Mexico.
Like Texas or Arizona, through Mexico, yes.
Okay.
So, I guess it's not impossible for a melanistic one to do that, and maybe that accounted for a sighting in Texas or something.
Okay.
We're straying away from where I did my research.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. It's hard to say things are impossible. So.
But as far as we know, there's no black panthers in the southeast.
As far as we know.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. So now let's talk about taxonomy and range. So we're going to start with the general species, and then we're going to break it down to the subspecies that the Florida panther falls into. So their scientific name for the species is Puma concolor. So
Okay.
what do we think?
Two color?
Two color?
Is
That's
that what-
close. Of uniform color.
Oh, okay.
So it doesn't have like spots or anything.
So it's the
like
total
that?
opposite.
So, yeah, but you said color. So
Right,
maybe
I did
that's
say
close.
color there. Okay.
And for the word puma, the only thing I could find was mountain lion.
Oh,
That
all right.
translation. So I don't know if that's correct. It just kind of seems like a really specific translation, but a mountain lion of uniform color.
Yeah, that's a
makes
good
sense.
description.
Yeah. So what's really awesome about these cats is their range, even now, but especially historically, because they've ranged in North America, as far north as Canada, from west coast to east coast, so throughout the United States into Canada, throughout Central America, and throughout South America,
That's a huge range.
making it the most widespread mammal in the Western Hemisphere.
Whoa,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
I know, isn't it?
But that's not still their range, is it?
Yes, where they can be found in like the Pacific Northwest and up in like Canada, as well as South America, but due to habitat fragmentation, habitat destruction, and extensive human persecution,
Yeah.
their range has, shrunk to certain areas within that, and has been restricted to more remote areas with less human influence, progress, hunting, those sorts of things.
But often those attacks occur in that wild human interface where people are moving into
Yes.
kind of these last refuges of their habitat, and that's when bad things happen.
That's when it can happen.
Yeah.
So we gotta find the coexistence with their apex predators, right?
Yeah.
So, but that massive range is why they have so many different common names. You hear puma, cougar, mountain lion. You said some word that I've never heard of.
Catamount.
Catamount, yeah,
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
Oh yeah.
Now, they belong to the family Felidae, which are cats,
Mm-hmm.
and then the subfamily within that, Felinae. And these are the small cats. Small. So like pumas, cheetahs, lynxes,
Okay.
ocelots.
As opposed to say lions and tigers.
Pantherinae, those are the large cats. So
Okay.
African lions,
Yeah.
tigers.
So African lions are in Pantherinae? Are they?
The subfamily,
Oh, okay.
yes.
Okay.
The subfamily. But the family Felidae encompasses all of them.
Gotcha.
So it gets broken down even more. So now let's break it down into subspecies. So the Florida panther, along with all the other pumas in North America, fall under the subspecies Puma concolor cougar, which I've seen that common name usually, at least on iNaturalist, as the North American mountain lion.
Okay.
I don't know, I just like to say puma.
Right.
So now the interesting thing about that, and another connection with the canebrake rattlesnake, is that they used to have their own subspecies designation.
I did come across this.
Yes, of Puma concolor corii. And I can't remember when, but it was not too long ago that they changed that. And that kind of got some people agitated because they wanted the Florida panther to be its own subspecies.
Right.
And some continue to use that subspecies designation to this day. But recent genetic studies have said they're just so similar to all the other ones in North America, and I think Central America as well, that they're all Puma concolor cougar.
So right now, all of our mountain lions in North America, and you said even down into Central America, are considered the same species genetically.
Same subspecies.
Same subspecies
Yes.
genetically. So the ones down in South America are a different subspecies.
Yeah, I think they're Puma concolor concolor.
Okay. All right. But they're all the same species officially.
Puma concolor.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Gotcha. And I just want to make sure I get it in my head. So formerly the ones here, the Florida panther, was considered a separate subspecies.
Yes, there used to be a lot more. So like Texas cougars had their own subspecies.
Okay.
The taxonomy of pumas in general is just real muddy.
Okay.
So when you talk about the historic range of the Florida Panther and the taxonomy in general, it gets real muddy.
Well, sure, because a lot of subspecies and even species classification historically was based on like appearance, things we could see.
Yes.
And then genetics has really been, I would say genetics has helped us clear things up, but the fact that all of those historical designations are still out there and you're able to come across them, that can sometimes muddy the water. You want to be sure that what you're looking at is the most recent
for sure
designation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But that being said, I want to be sure the audience understands that even though all of the North American and some the Central American subspecies are considered the same subspecies, there are still some differences. Like you mentioned, the Florida Panther is slightly smaller than other mountain lion populations, but that doesn't mean that they're a different subspecies.
Correct.
Yeah, so I just want to be sure people got that.
Yep.
So there can be differences, and just not enough to differentiate them into another subspecies.
Absolutely. Yeah. So while habitat loss and fragmentation are considered the #1 reason for the decline of puma numbers and range, human persecution, mostly in the 1800s and early 1900s, played a huge role as well. Many pumas have taken their last breath in a tree surrounded by barking dogs.
Right.
And people are just afraid of them in general or afraid for their livestock.
Right, because this southern Florida was big ranching.
Yeah, and that's why it's kind of funny. Southern Florida itself is why these pumas were able to cling on, because pumas in every other place east of the Mississippi River have been extirpated. So when you look at a range map of pumas in the United States, you see the pockets of them in the west and then just one dot in South Florida.
Right.
Yeah, and because the swampy, more wild nature of South Florida slowed down human progress relative to other places in the east and made it harder to go out and send them to oblivion, they were able to cling on. So a lot of people, and this was myself for a long time, thought the Florida Panther is this swamp-loving cat. That's the environment they love. They're a big swamp cat, but that's not the case. This is the environment where they weren't driven to extinction.
The ones that were left like, well, I guess we got to live here.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. So, but being a species that has the range like it does, clearly they're adaptable.
Right.
Yeah. So that's why they've been able to survive there.
So if Florida had been less swampy, there probably would be no Florida Panthers left here.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for being wild, Florida.
Yeah.
Hopefully it stays that way.
But that's why the Seminole natives were able to cling on too, because I think the Seminoles were the population that was down here was one of the only groups that didn't sign a treaty.
I don't know.
Because they were able to hide out in the swamps of southern Florida, and the U.S. government was not able to get to them. So.
Yeah, it was interesting hearing about Seminoles and natives in Okefenokee region too, and how it was like the U.S. soldiers just struggle to get through that type of an environment. They're marching their uniforms and everything in swamp and muck, and they're like, what the heck?
Yeah. We were at the visitor center yesterday, folks, and there were pictures of, in the 1800s, people would nail boards to their boots so they could walk through the swamp. And then I actually saw swamp horseshoes that were these big metal horseshoes that they would attach to the horseshoes of horses. So then the horses could theoretically navigate the swamps. I just imagined they'd get stuck even worse.
Who knows? Maybe it worked. Maybe it worked.
But you gotta, the perseverance of those people, because folks, we talked about coming down here during the dry season. I've never been down here in the Everglades in June or July, but I've just heard like the mosquitoes will carry you off, and there were so many displays that just seemed to be focused on, this is what people did to keep the bugs away, and this is what the people did to keep the bugs away, and this is what the people did.
Can you imagine?
No, my God. Even folks, but we mentioned there's a lot of rain here. The first night we were here, we were taking a hike after some rain, and man, the bugs were. Normally, bugs don't bother me that much, but there were some times.
This is different.
Man, yeah.
They're a little bit different down here.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were biting through. Like I had an insect repellent shirt, like it was like the netting type of stuff, and I had a shirt underneath that, and the mosquitoes at Big Cypress just tore me up. Yeah,
they were laughing at that.
They're biting through it. They're like, get this weak stuff out of here. So by the 1960s, fewer than about 30 Florida Panther were estimated to be left.
Wow. So just take a minute and let that sink in. 30 individuals. Like, that's a population that's seriously endangered, not just because of numbers, but as we've talked about many times in the podcast, genetics. Like, that is a tiny population where there's not enough genetic diversity to withstand like diseases and threats that require some kind of adaptation.
And some even thought at that point they were gone.
And at
already.
what time? When
this is like by the 1960s.
Okay, yeah, because the little bit of research that I did, I was surprised to learn that like the 60s and the 70s, there were some people that just said they're extinct, they're not out there. The sightings that people have just aren't, they're probably bobcats.
Yeah.
So there were people that were just convinced, no, they're gone.
Well, think of how few people see them now, and there's like 200.
Right.
So imagine with
And
30.
not everybody had a cell phone back then. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. And things would have been even more wild back then
Right.
relative to now. I
Yeah.
mean, the development in Florida is just an unstoppable machine, it
Right.
seems, unfortunately.
One thing that always blows my mind when I talk to people about the Everglades and when I read about the Everglades is that even though the wildlife down here is amazing and it seems so abundant, and we saw so much yesterday just in one day, 90% of the bird population here is gone. Like the birds that you see, that's only 10% of what was here, say, 100, 150 years ago. Early accounts of people coming here, the birds were just incredible, the diversity and the numbers. And now it's 10% of what was here historically.
It's amazing to think with just how incredible this place is. It's almost overwhelming, all the wading birds you see and all this such. It is nothing compared to how it used to be.
Yeah, right?
And that's just, it's a sobering thought. It's a weird thought. Now, let's get into some of the natural history here. And the foundation for that really has been radio collars. For such an elusive animal, that's what you need to get data on them. But you have to equip the Panthers with the radio collars. So reading about those processes were always interesting. They would use dogs, much like the hunters did when they were wiping them out, to then tree the cat. So the dogs could smell it and pursue the cat. And normally not long after that, the Panther's instinct is to climb a tree.
Okay.
And once it's up in the tree, the biologist would assess how healthy it looks, if it can survive and handle, the procedure that would come next. And they would tranquilize it, and then the cat would fall into a crash bag, or it would, pass out in the tree. And somebody would have to climb up there and get it. It's like, I want to do that. That'd be fun.
Some poor intern's job. You'd be all over it though.
Oh my God, that would be so much fun.
How much do they weigh?
So, well, the biggest one from the studies that I was reading was 154 pounds.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Can you imagine getting that out of a tree?
Up in a tree. And remember, it's like passed out, so that's like
right. Dead weight.
Yeah. So once they then have the cat, then they can equip the collar. A lot of times they would give them vaccines and such for certain diseases. They do testing and genetic testing as well. And there are pretty much, I'm sure there's more kind of into this, it's more complex, but the two main types of collars that I can find were these telemetry collars and then the GPS collars.
So those telemetry collars, folks, those are the ones where you see pictures of someone holding up an antenna.
Yes.
And they're waiting for the beeps to get closer together.
Yes.
So those aren't nearly as specific in locating them as the GPS collars.
Yes.
But they're a lot cheaper.
They're cheaper and they're used a lot more because although you really only can get daytime location data because you do telemetry flights during the daytime, which is why there's a lot of debate over which habitat the Panther uses, but they're cheaper, they last a lot longer in the field, and they're more durable. So think, whenever something goes wrong, you have to recapture that cat.
Right.
And you want to limit that because it is a stressful procedure.
Sure.
It is pretty invasive. It's needed, but it is pretty invasive. So the GPS collars, while they can provide that nocturnal habitat use data, the battery doesn't last near as long, they're not as durable, so you have to have way more recaptures. Yeah. So until the technology still improves greatly with GPS, the telemetry is still used a lot.
I got to imagine how strong a Florida Panther is. Those collars have got to be pretty heavy duty. Because whenever I've seen pictures of cats with the collars, I'm always like, man, that collar looks so meaty and so big, but I imagine it has to be. I just know my cat's at home. Like, when they don't want something on, like, they get it off.
So the habitats, the general consensus is, and this just makes sense, tree cover. Expansive tree cover in forests are their most important habitats. Okay. That's what you want to protect. They've kind of argued how exclusive that is. So while it is the consensus that tree cover is the most important part, previous studies have showed that open areas are not really useful to them. Okay. But future studies that have had GPS have showed, no, they do use these open grasslands, drier places. So that's the key. You want a lot of cover and then drier areas.
So a variety.
Yeah, so they aren't this like swamp cat that people think. They can adapt and deal with that, especially like when you're in big cypress or the Everglades. There's a lot of that, so that will occupy their territories. They do want those drier forests. Okay. So they really love hardwood hammocks. That's the one they said they would spend their most amount of time in with these telemetry studies. So
folks, the hardwood hammocks, we mentioned them at the top of the episode, those are the highest and driest habitats in the Everglades, and really the densest. Like when the first time I came down and walked through a hardwood hammock, my kind of stereotypical picture of a jungle, because it's like dense undergrowth, it's not a forest that you can walk through. There's just too much undergrowth there.
And for an ambush predator, that's what you want.
Right.
You want that undergrowth.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So they like the dryness there. So they'll also use habitats like pine lands, where we are now. They really like the pine lands and the ubiquitous saw palmettos growing underneath that provides that cover and protection for when they're rearing kittens. But they will use cypress swamps as well, cabbage palm woodlands, but again, they like the drier areas better. Okay. So earlier studies have pretty much dismissed the use of like farmland and open fields, but future studies again have shown, drier fields, places where you're going to see deer, are places that are useful to them.
Sure.
And that just makes sense that they would use edges, because that's what the white-tailed deer like to use.
Yeah, right.
It just makes sense that way.
It's funny, as you were mentioning, like here in the Pinelands, I think we said that it seems relatively open, because as we said, the trees are relatively, the slash pines kind of spaced out, you can kind of see for a while, but the growth on the floor of the Pinelands, it's, now that you said that, it's like just tall enough for a panther to move through.
Yes.
Like a panther could be 10 feet off the trail edge here, and we wouldn't even know it was there.
If I had a magic 8-ball, I would have loved to have asked, how close was I to a panther when I was a big
Right.
cypress? Was it 3 miles or was it 3 feet?
It was like every 10 minutes you were passing a Florida.
Who knows?
And they were
Who
saying,
knows?
look at this guy with the face paint on. Like,
Oh yeah, who is this guy? Full camo, getting frustrated with mosquitoes and such. So, the thing about the Panthers too is that they have these humongous home ranges. That's what you always hear about them, and this is why the habitat fragmentation is so detrimental to them.
All right.
They require a lot of space.
So tell people,
Home range.
what do you mean by habitat fragmentation?
So habitat fragmentation is, say you have a large area of forest and you just take part of it and make a room for houses, and then you destroy another part of it to build a supermarket, and you disrupt and destroy these single unbroken, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Unbroken forest.
Even a road.
Putting
a road through a forest, that's fragmenting the forest, an unbroken piece of habitat, into multiple habitats.
Yes.
And for some animals, it's not a huge deal, but for other animals, that road can be like a wall that they're not going to cross.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for an animal that moves around a lot and has a huge home range,
Right.
that habitat fragmentation, the issues of that is just compounded.
So tell me if I'm right. I read that the range of a male Florida Panther, 200 square miles?
200 square miles or more.
And that's 4 times larger than the size of the city of Miami.
So they're needy.
Which is a problem here in Southern.
Yeah.
They need a lot of land, and land is at a premium.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the resident, adult male panthers that have a territory. The females don't need as big of a territory, so about like 75.
That's all.
It's only 75 square miles.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a female panther.
Wow.
So, and again, there is variation. There is mentions of like 400 square miles.
Wow.
So I mean,
they need a lot of habitat.
The home range will overlap with females a lot more than it does with males. These adult male Florida Panthers, the resident males that I mentioned, they patrol this territory, and especially when nearby females are in estrus, they will kill other males that enter that territory.
Wow.
So they're hunting, but they're patrolling, and they'll just kill other male panthers that venture into it.
So the ladies are way more tolerant of each other than the dudes are.
Way more tolerant.
Okay.
Like you can't stress that enough
Yeah.
there. Yeah. And in fact, the second leading cause in panther death is intra-specific competition. So panther on panther violence.
And number 1?
Vehicle collisions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why those roads.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, that's just amazing when you hear about these territories there. They're so big, and if you're a young male panther trying to establish a territory, you're going through a gauntlet of suburbia, of resident males trying to kill you. I mean, that's why these young panthers can wander so far away, even into Georgia. Man. A Florida panther was shot and killed in Georgia. I can't remember what year it was, but when they did the genetic testing, it was
from southern Florida.
From Florida.
Wow.
So that movement is crucial.
If only we could convince them to just get along a little better.
Yeah, just a little bit more.
They're the number 2 cause of death is Florida Panthers.
Florida Panthers, yeah. And when you read about their territories, so in the telemetry data and the studies that they've done, it's real crazy how you'll have one territory of, say 200 square miles, and there's a resident male that patrols it, and he'll kill the other males that enter that territory, especially if there's breeding females nearby. But then one day, when he's a little bit older, he'll meet his match. And when another panther kills him, they take almost that exact territory, especially the heart of it. So the analogy that the biologist made was like, and this also happens if a resident male gets hit by a car. then a lucky transient male nearby will just
Grab
hop into
that.
that territory
Gotcha.
and defend it. It's almost like you have a neighbor living on your block, they move out, and then you move into their house and just modify the property lines a little bit.
Okay.
That was the analogy he made.
Okay.
And that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And this was done over telemetry studies of 5 resident males that lived in the Fakahatchee Strand in South Florida from 1981 to 1994. And I mean, and they overlapped the territories, and they were just, the heart of it especially was so similar. It really is amazing that way. And then again, the young males will disperse hundreds of miles to find their own home because they're really traveling that gauntlet. And that's why when you're in Florida, you'll see these wildlife underpasses under Alligator Alley, State Road 29, and other places to help these young males, go to different habitats and avoid vehicular collisions.
Right.
And it has helped some. So hunting and activity. So another reason why seeing panthers is something that doesn't happen very often is because they tend to be nocturnal. So they'll still be active at dawn, but that activity does decrease as the day goes on. And usually by midday or even earlier, they're in a saw palmetto place, resting, sleeping. And by evening, that's when they'll awake again and begin their nocturnal activities, which is traveling to different places and hunting.
So we're out here at the worst possible time to see the Florida Panther.
Yeah, but even if we were, you're at the best possible time.
True.
And that's because, and I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to mention, while they are in Everglades National Park, it's not ideal habitat, again, because of just the amount of these open wetlands. Mm-hmm. It's never been a great place for them. And now that you have invasive Burmese pythons here, eating all the other mammals, it's made it even worse.
Less prey for them.
Less prey for them.
Right.
As I mentioned earlier, they are ambush predators, so they really like the cover of darkness, and they like the cover of undergrowth, and they ambush. So they'll sneak up on a white-tailed deer or a hog. That's their top 2 prey animals. And they'll attack it hopefully without the prey even knowing, and it's always a lunge to the throat to kill the animal. Nice, right?
Do they have wild hogs here?
So, yes.
Non-native.
Non-native.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. It used to be white-tailed deer was the number 1 prey, but as these hogs just continue to grow in their population, they believe that they're easier to catch than the white-tailed deer.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah. So they made the transition from that. But they will eat armadillos, raccoons, and sometimes birds. And when you get to open wetlands, like in the eastern places of Big Cypress and in Everglades National Park, where it's not as good habitat for deer and such, they're going to be eating more of raccoons, sometimes American alligators,
and children.
Otters, and children. Yeah, for sure, for sure. So it was always interesting because, when I'm crouched down in the woods waiting for a panther to come by, a catbird would be really loud, like in the shrubs to my right. I'm like, what is that? So the catbirds were messing with me. In one scat survey that they did, they even found the remains of a bear cub. But that was in the Everglades because they gotta, widen their prey selection.
Sure.
In the Everglades and places like that, they also have a wider home range because they need to travel more to find adequate prey.
Right.
And you'll hear about pumas caching their prey. They do that here, but they can't hold the prey cached as long as the other pumas out west in colder climates because of the Florida sun. It'll spoil the food.
It spoils too quickly, yeah.
So, again, the panthers are more productive, they produce more young, and they have smaller home ranges where food is abundant. They will hunt livestock and pets, especially in places like the Golden Gates Estates where you have, I just saw a video that came out a couple months ago of a panther peeking through a woman's, I don't know if you saw, it's like a sliding glass door of her house.
Oh, I did see
that.
I'm
like, man, this person could be just watching TV and they got a panther sighting.
You're super jealous of it, right?
I'm super jealous, yeah. I'll admit it. And I didn't look into that too much because it's not as, polarizing as the topic of like wolves with livestock. But there is a website called Panther Pulse, and they list all the deaths of panthers documented, and you look and it's like vehicle, other panther, vehicle, and also documented depredations.
Okay.
So if you want to get a sense for what they're doing, that Panther Pulse is a good source.
How much livestock is being taken?
Yeah,
okay.
Livestock and pets as well.
Okay.
Because it has happened, but it's not as polarizing again as the wolf issue.
Okay.
So breeding. What is kind of helpful to the Florida Panthers is they don't have a specific breeding season, but they usually tend to breed in the late fall and winter and then give birth to the kittens in the springtime.
Okay.
The females in estrus will leave scrapes and scents as well as produce pheromones that will signal to nearby males, and this will increase the testosterone production in males and really rev them up. So if another male enters their territory then, that's when they're a lot more likely to then attack or kill it. The gestation period is about 3 months, And they can have, anywhere from 1 to 4 kittens, although 2, according to the studies, appears to be the average. And the kittens will live in a stationary den for about 50 or so days until they are grown enough to travel with their mother while she hunts. So, and as the kittens get more developed, the mother can travel a little bit more, and they stay with her for, about a year and a half. And then they venture off onto their own.
Are there dens? Are they like excavating a den, or are they just using like...
Yeah, they're just using vegetation.
Okay.
So saw palmettos was the biggest one for that. I mean, just look how impenetrable that is.
Yeah.
And anybody in there, you wouldn't be able to see until you're right up to it.
So folks, we're standing next, this is saw palmetto right here, right?
No, this is not.
This is a different kind of palm, but
different kind.
Saw palmetto, when it is growing, there's usually grows, at least starting out, it's relatively short.
Yes.
Right? So maybe as tall as a person. Lots of leaves though, and then the blades of the fronds have sharp spines on them.
Yeah,
very
it hurts
sharp.
to walk through it.
Yeah. So it's a good place to hide out.
Males, they think, require about to be 3 years old to reproduce, and they have to disperse and find an area to be able to do it. And the females, they found to reproduce before they're 2 years of age. Okay. So that's reproduction.
And what's the lifespan?
That one was tough to find.
Okay.
So it might be out there, but that's one that I didn't come across.
Not
I
sure.
thought of that recently.
We'll try to look that up and put that in the episode notes.
Yeah.
I'm going to say 20 to 30 years.
20 to 30 years? I think I read 20, but it was on, who knows. I was trying to find it like mentioned in a research paper or something like that. Otherwise,
it's a total guess. Sounds good.
So with that in mind, those are the places I tried to find when I went looking for them. And after days of maybe finding a track here or there, towards the end of my trip, I found a trail that was dry and surrounded by cypress swamp. So I figured, okay, they'll use this to stay dry.
Hang on one sec. So give people an idea, what does a cypress swamp look like?
Good call, Bill. Cypress trees are a dominant tree that you find down in the southeast especially, and they really thrive in wet habitats. So you have these large cypress trees that are growing in standing water. So you can be walking in a cypress forest but be knee deep or more in water. So panthers will use them, but again, they like the drier spots. Okay. So this trail that was a little bit higher in elevation was a lot drier. It had more cover, so I just thought they would be using this. And when I got there was panther tracks going up and down it, and bear tracks.
So how'd you know a panther track?
So it looks just like a bobcat track, but it's way bigger. I mean, these tracks are the size, they say like the size of a baseball or larger.
But what if people don't know what a bobcat track looks like?
They have, I'm getting there.
Okay,
I'm getting
there.
All right. The 4 toes that you see, think of like a dog print. It's similar that way, but they don't have the claws because they retract them.
More round than a dog track.
More round. And then I guess you would say that the pad at the bottom of the paw print has 3 lobes. And then the top part of it, on the bottom. Yeah, on the bottom part of it there. And then the top part of that pad, there's like I guess there's 1 crease, so it would be 2 lobes.
Okay.
Yeah, so those lobes, that's an indication of a cat.
I was reading one description, it said like the space between the toes and the pad, it was like, was it a C or something like that?
Yeah, it looks like a C.
Kind of like a C-like shape.
And the toes are asymmetrical.
Okay.
That's another one too. When you think of a dog track, they tend to be maybe a little bit more symmetrical.
Mm-hmm. And a dog track's more oval, where this is more round.
More round.
And so you said the panther track was as big as
about a baseball. It's like a rough.
Right.
But
and a bobcat would be what, like?
I think they say like a silver dollar or something.
Okay.
I can't remember what
racquetball.
Yeah.
To keep that ball analogy going.
So, smaller. Yeah, but these were huge, and they were in mud, but they were very large tracks.
And why can't you see any claw marks in it? I'm betting some of our listeners know, but for those that don't,
they retract them.
Okay. Did you mention that?
To keep them sharp. I did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But canines cannot.
No, they can't.
So very often, if you see the claw marks and it's more of an oblong track, you're probably looking at a canine track. Whereas, because I did read that when they are chasing something, sometimes the claw marks are visible in a Florida Panther track.
For like grip and such while they're running, and probably just in preparation for the kill.
Yeah, but typically no.
Yeah, because they use them to kill and hunt, unlike canines, so they want to keep them sharp. Yeah. And if you're just walking on these places all the time with their claws out, it's going to reduce their sharpness there. Right. So what I did was I followed this path, and I'm like, hopefully it'll lead to some kind of a hammock or something. And it led to this awesome looking pine forest. I was like, man, this is great habitat for them. And there's tracks everywhere. It was dry. There's saw palmettos. So my last 2 stakeouts, which is when I'd sit down and probably look silly in full camo, face paint, all that stuff with my camera.
And what time of day was this?
I would get there at like 5 a.m. and then when I'd go in the afternoon, I'd get there at like 3 and stay till darkness.
Okay.
I did hear it was definitely a cat, probably about 30 yards left of me. It was like a raspy, like a meow, meow, but like really raspy and kind of scary.
Yeah.
And I know that bobcats make a similar sound, but that pumas do that as well.
Okay.
So, but it very well could have been a panther.
Sure,
Because
okay.
there were tracks everywhere, and it was a great habitat surrounded by a lot of areas where they probably wouldn't want to be. So
Some kind of wild cat.
I'll take that. I'll certainly take that. I didn't even know if I was going to find tracks.
Right.
So
I mean, hey, you found tracks. And you said you find scat?
I did not find
You didn't
scat.
find any scat. But you
Yeah.
found tracks and you heard a wildcat. So,
Yeah. And it was, you can go out in Big Cypress and see nothing and have a great time.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally a cool place.
So how many days were you out there for?
I was out there for 4 nights.
Okay.
Yeah, so for
Wow.
about 5 days.
Very
yeah,
cool.
solo camping, and it was a lot of fun. Saw a lot of owls, wading birds, alligators. So it was a great time. It was good to spend some solitude in the woods.
So I'm sure people at home are thinking, like, weren't you scared of alligators getting you?
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
No, I was not.
Why?
So because we are not the ideal prey for American alligators.
Right.
Yeah, and a lot of people think we are, because when you're living where we are up north, the only time you hear about them is when they do end up attacking somebody. Mm-hmm. But when you look at these attacks, I don't want to say always, it's usually, the vast majority of cases, a habituated, larger alligator that has been fed by people. Because when an alligator is being fed by people, they stop looking at a human as, ooh, that's scary, to, I get food whenever I see this thing.
Right.
And they lose their natural fear of humans, and that's when things can happen. But when you're in these more wild places where that isn't happening, it's not a retention pond in a suburb in Florida or somewhere, they retain that natural fear a lot more.
And that's what we want.
That's what we want.
Yeah,
absolutely. Same with bears.
Right.
It's the same
Don't
thing.
feed them. Keep them wild.
Don't feed them. And it's people, like when I worked at Okefenokee, it was always taking people out to see alligators. And they go in there with that fear. And like some people, are they going to attack the boat? Are they going to jump in the boat and try to eat us? And we were at a refuge where they, other than the alligators around the boat basin that steal the fish people catch on their poles, they're afraid of us. I mean, I'll be in a canoe and I paddled right next to this one that was like 11 feet long. And I didn't know he was there until I was right next to him. Right. And it does get your heart rate up a little bit.
Yeah.
And you're in a narrow path, but just want nothing to do with you.
Right.
Now that gator could easily if he wanted to, but you just understand that they don't want to. And it's the same with the panther, and it's the same with the Florida black bear. So as much as when you're out at night by yourself, it was intimidating. Sure. It was a little nerve-wracking, but I was reassured by those
what
notions.
Yeah, and I don't want to downplay the fact that these animals, when you're close to them, it is natural to be apprehensive. Because the other night we were out and we saw a 10-foot alligator, in a little ditch alongside the road, and getting close to it, like, it's just natural to be like, whoa, like this thing could make a quick meal out of me if it wanted to.
If it wanted to.
Yeah, but you got to remind yourself that these animals aren't here to eat us. They're not looking at us as prey species.
Yeah,
typically.
As much as we want to talk about that, you do have to say, admire from a distance.
Right.
Be respectful, because again, nothing's impossible, and it has happened in certain situations with black bears, pumas, and alligators.
Right.
So admire from a distance. Don't be like the tourists in Yellowstone with the bison.
Yeah, exactly.
So all right, so now we'll just get to kind of towards the end of the things we want to talk about here, some of the conservation and threats that the panthers still continue to face today.
Okay.
In 1967, that's when they were federally listed as endangered.
So they must have been listed under the precursor to the Endangered Species Act, because that came out in '73. So I know there were some protections ahead of that. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
all right.
Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying that, because I would not have known.
The only reason I remember when the Endangered Species Act was passed is because that's the year I was born. 1973.
There you go. There you go.
So that just sticks in my head.
We did just celebrate Bill's 50th birthday.
We did.
Happy late birthday, Bill.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
It was. So, and again, by the 1960s, there were fewer than like 30 of them. Now, they were helped a little bit by the establishments of the Big Cypress National Preserve as a wild place in 1937. Parts of the Fakahatchee Strand Preserve Park were acquired in 1974. Everglades National Park was acquired in 1947, but they didn't help too much. By the 90s, they thought that there was about 50 or so left, and that they were of very poor genetic diversity, and a lot of models predicted inevitable extinction. So this led to the single most significant conservation action in 1995, which is when they introduced 8 female pumas from Texas into South Florida to breed with the remaining males to increase the genetic diversity. And they selected those pumas because historically, the pumas living around Florida would have ventured into that area and vice versa.
There would have been some overlap.
This did get some pushback because when you start getting into the weeds of things, is it now a Florida Panther now that it has Texas Puma DNA mixed in?
Right.
But when you look at what happened and that the population started to grow after that to what it is now today, around maybe 200 individuals or so, it's hard to deny that that was a win.
And wasn't the kinked tail and the cowlick, weren't those genetic abnormalities brought about because of inbreeding?
Because of inbreeding.
Okay, so you mentioned those earlier in the episode, and that's why those stuck in my head.
Yes.
So they were seeing evidence of that. And if you saw a puma with those, that's a puma that was suffering from inbreeding.
Yes.
Yeah, at least to some degree.
There was an issue with having only one descended testes.
Oh.
So that would cause the sperm to become too warm in the body and die, and that may have affected reproduction as well.
Yeah, there's so many things that can crop up because of inbreeding. So how many did they introduce? 8?
8.
8.
Yeah,
okay.
8. So it's not like they're just going to totally swamp out the Florida Panther genetics, right? And
you mentioned that it was debated at that time of whether they should do that. And at that time in the 90s, DNA testing of genetics wasn't as far along.
Yes.
So I imagine there were a lot more people that kind of had it in their head. This is a different panther here in Florida.
And they were different subspecies back then as well.
Right. So I'm sure there were a lot of people that said, no, you're going to muddy this population too much. But I feel like, based on the limited information that I have, that DNA kind of proved that it was okay. They're really not that different genetically.
Yes.
So this shot of new genetics from Texas made this population healthier.
Well, the population started growing as a result, and some conservationists and biologists did argue against it as well because they thought it was putting a Band-Aid on the overall problem of lack of suitable habitat in space.
Sure.
It's you're improving the genetic diversity in these limited, suitable areas, but it's just going to result in that same issue again.
Yeah, I can see that, but at the same time, I'm like, well,
you gotta do something now. They're struggling.
But I would even say, even if the opposite argument was, well, let's say you could wave a magic wand and take care of the habitat issue, you still have the genetic issue.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. There's also a study that I came across where they utilized telemetry data from live kitten captures, and genetics and modeling, and they assessed survival rate of kittens, and they had a bunch of different genetic cohorts. Because here's the other crazy thing about the Florida Panther. I think it was 1986 when they did the first ever capture of one in the Everglades. They found a genetically healthy specimen that looked different than the genetically defect ones in Southwest Florida, and they were puzzled by that. And from genetic sampling, they found it had ancestry from Central American pumas.
What?
I've heard different things. In the book from the biologist that I read, there was a roadside attraction in the 1950s and 60s that had pumas from Central America, and they either released them at one point or they escaped, but that put a little bit of genetic ingression of Central American. I've also heard that it was sportsmen that knew the panther was struggling and took matters into their own hands and imported Central American pumas into Homestead, because Homestead was a huge importation. That's why it's the Black Panther things are possible.
That's true.
Yeah.
There was a lot
of the pythons, was around that area. Nile crocodiles have been found outside of Homestead.
Wow.
So, but that's crazy. So the Everglades Panthers have a little bit of this Central American ancestry to it.
Wow.
So they assess this. So it really is. It's amazing. And when you get into the genetics and the taxonomy, it is a mess. Yeah. So it's hard to break that down. We just did as best we can. When you get into survival rate, the ones under the model with the highest survival rating were the offspring of a traditional Florida Panther male and one of the original Texas Pumas. Their offspring.
Okay.
They had the most genetic richness and the highest survival rate. So between the studies from this expansive model resulting from telemetry data and captures from 1982 to 2008.
Wow, it's a nice spread.
Between that and the population expansion, it is hard to deny the success of that introduction of the 8 cougars.
Right. So we still have the issue of habitat encroachment and fragmentation, but the genetic issue seems to be in a good place.
It's better. But, when you look at Florida, even before all the extirpation and the hunting and the habitat loss, they're on a peninsula, And, you got Lake Okeechobee and the waterways that spread off of it. So they were isolated. So there's probably a little bit of inbreeding that went on even when their populations were healthy. And also, too, when they dredged the Caloosahatchee River, which flows pretty much out of the west side of Lake Okeechobee, which is like, would you say, like in the middle of South Florida, maybe 2/3 of the way down the state?
Kind of look at break the peninsula into two and look at the bottom half. Yeah, Lake Okeechobee. So just tell people real quick, why is Lake Okeechobee, like, what is it? Why is it so important?
Traditionally, it was the source of water for the Everglades.
Yeah, they call it the heart of the Everglades.
Flow down through into South Florida. But why I brought it up was the Caloosahatchee River, they widened it out, so it made an almost impassable barrier to make them even more restricted into the south. And I think it was in 2018, but for the first time in I think it was like 40 years, a breeding female with kittens was found north of the Caloosahatchee River. And
they figure a female
made the swim across the river.
Across it. Wow.
There had already been males, and the males, because they're the ones that disperse.
Right.
But it's about the breeding population.
Sure.
So that was a huge win. Yeah.
Wow, I bet she was popular.
So yeah, she swam the river.
Yeah.
So if you look at Panther Pulse, in 2023 you had 13 vehicular deaths, but that was low. In 2022 there's 27, and in 2021 there was 21. So that's about 10% of the population.
I was just gonna say, like just thinking of those numbers randomly, that doesn't seem that much, but when you only have 200 maybe cats, that's wow.
Now, kind of the sad thing, it was hard to find information on this because this is kind of a recent thing, but they thought that perhaps the decrease in vehicular collisions this year was because the population's lower than anticipated. And they've been finding evidence of this disorder, I'm going to butcher this, it's like feline leukomyelopathy, and it affects their hind legs. So it might be people just kind of jumping the ship on this, but they're like, not as many got killed by cars, there's not as many out there, we're finding evidence of this disorder, so their population's even lower than we thought. Hopefully that's not the case. Okay. But I couldn't really find any study about that.
Okay.
Yeah, lots of vehicular collisions.
Maybe people are just driving better.
Well, I thought maybe the wildlife underpasses, they're using them more.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's definitely not people driving better. When I was driving to my stakeouts on State Road 29, I had people shining their brights behind me. There's flashing Panther signs up and down the road, and I'm getting tailgated and people are honking at me and all this stuff.
They can tell you're a tree hugger.
Yeah, I guess so. Drive slow, you're in a Panther area. So I did want to end on a really positive note though, about the Florida Panther here, and that's this project of the Florida Wildlife Corridor.
Oh, yeah.
So in 2021, the Florida legislature created the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act, which funds, encourages, and promotes investments into areas to protect and enhance the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which is about an 18 million acre space, which is a patchwork of various habitats and lands to connect from South Florida all the way up to North Florida.
Yeah.
Again to Georgia. And it involves easements, it involves cooperation with private landowners and ranches to just create this big wild space that panthers can hopefully utilize to expand their range.
And not just panthers.
Yeah,
right?
When you protect the panther, you protect everybody.
Yep. Folks, a lot of conservation efforts in the past 10, even 20 years have been focused on connectivity and trying to create networks of wild lands. And a lot of people, when they hear about this, we're trying to create this wildlife corridor of connected lands, they think, the government's going to come in and take all this land. But a lot of it is established, as you said, through easements, which are private lands where landowners have agreed not to develop their property, often for things like tax breaks and other advantages that they can get. So like if you out there, if you have a piece of property that has some significant ecological value, you can contact like a local land trust and see about getting a conservation easement placed on your property where you can still use that property and it's your property to do with what you will. Just the development rights are now going to be owned by the land trust, and they will keep it, then they say, in perpetuity, so that land will remain wild. Yeah. And if it's within a corridor, it could be like a valuable piece of connecting lands.
Yeah, so enticing people to have and maintain good habitat for panther and other wildlife, and subsidizing and helping that, as opposed to regulations and in quotes punishing people for living on good panther habitat.
Right.
That's the way they see it, and that's a complex issue, but that's the way to go.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, they want, I mean, it's the state animal of Florida, and a lot of people want this animal to increase in range and prosper, so that is an awesome project.
Are you going to talk about the documentary?
That's what I was going to say. If you wanted to learn more about this project and learn about the Panther in general and see some absolutely stunning footage and photos taken by Carlton Ward of Florida Panther, it's by Nat Geo, but it's on Disney Plus, I think.
It's on Disney Plus and Hulu right now.
Disney Plus and Hulu. It's called Path of the Panther, and oh my gosh.
Oh, the photos they got, the video they got, yeah.
Unbelievable.
Best pictures I've ever seen.
Amazing.
Panthers,
yeah.
And video.
And the video, and it just bears and all that stuff too, and they talked about the issues the Panther faced. They talked about the wildlife corridor and such. So it's a great way to really understand what's happening with the Panther in South Florida.
And I love how they talked to ranchers, and the one rancher was like, for so long, ranchers saw the Panther as the enemy, but he saw it now as like, when we're saving habitat for panthers, like, we're saving ranchers.
Yeah.
Because that's habitat for ranching too.
It's like, we got to work together. It shouldn't be this thing.
Yeah, and it was really like, it was an uplifting documentary. A lot of times wildlife documentaries are depressing, but I felt like this one it showed like a lot of good things that are happening. They had proposed a toll road. The state of Florida had proposed a toll road going through prime panther habitat, and people in Florida decided, no, we don't want that. Yeah. When I saw that part of the documentary and mentioned the toll road, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so depressing.
I know.
But then to find that, nope, they decided we're not going to put it in.
They blocked it.
Yeah, it was amazing.
It really is.
It was nice to get some good news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it looks like there may be a good future for our Florida Panther.
Yeah, awesome. So that's everything you got?
That's everything.
All right, beautiful. Thank you for taking this on, for risking your life. Not really. But honestly, thank you for coming down here, because since Daniel came down, I was able to come down here too.
Well, I'm glad you came down. And thanks for putting up with me and camping with my friends and everything like that.
It's been incredible.
Yeah.
So we're going to be down here. I'm going to be down here for a couple more days. Daniel's going to be down here for several more days.
Yes.
But as I'm talking, I'm realizing I'm so used to doing the research and prepping all this stuff, I did not prep an outro.
Oh, okay.
So I did not get a list of our current patrons and all that. So what I'll have to do is I'll have to put that together afterwards. Yeah. And then I'll get that to you, because Daniel is going to edit this episode. It's going to be his first one.
Yay! So the next one's a little wonky, don't blame Bill.
That's right. It's not my fault. But I do want to say, especially to our patrons and all our supporters, thank you so much for your continued support, for being patient with us, because I know we're not releasing episodes on a regular basis, but your support made this trip possible. We could not be standing here recording this. You wouldn't be listening to this without your support. So thank you so much for that, folks.
Thank you.
And we will see you next time. Stick around for the outro notes, and look for our next episode, hopefully very soon. All right. See you, folks.
Bye.
Hello, everyone. Steve here. So I wasn't able to join the guys on this last episode, so I'm out here on a walk in my hometown. A beautiful 50-degree night. I can see plenty of stars. I'm looking at Orion's belt right now. And I'm just gonna wrap up the episode for you. So first, let's do a couple shout outs. So last episode, Bill completely forgot to thank listener Sophie S., who originally emailed the idea for the timber rattlesnake episode. She's an educator at Denison Pequot Sepos Nature Center. Bill tried to get me on that, but I think I said it right, and that's in Mystic, Connecticut. And she was kind enough to invite us out to check out the nature center and their rehab animals. So thank you, Sophie, for both your email and the great work you're doing. Also, Sung, a grad student studying ecology in South Korea, they sent us an email from the other side of the world letting us know how much they've been enjoying the podcast. So thank you for listening, Sung, and best of luck with your degree. So we'd also like to thank our growing list of Patreon supporters. So thank you to our new patrons, Chris N., Hot Dog, Cold Weather, Dennis, and Dr. Judy. So special thanks to her also for letting us know that the FAB, F-A-B, in the anti-venom crow fab meant, and remember we joked about it meaning fabulous. Well, this is what Dr. Judith said. The fab part means fragments of antibodies. So FAB, fragments of antibodies. They are Y-shaped, and the top part of the Y is the active site that recognizes the antigen or the venom. Oh my God, I said venom. Bill's getting to me. The venom proteins, whereas the stem is more likely to cause hypersensitivity reactions, so they try to remove those if possible. Yes, so thank you very much for her pointing that out. So each episode, we like to give a special shout out to our top patrons. So stick around for the end of the episode to hear Bill's daughter Violet share that list. And remember, if you'd like to be part of the Field Guides and read our patron list in the future, email us at thefieldguides@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the podcast, consider becoming a patron of our show at patreon.com. As a patron, you'll get access to a special patrons-only version of our episode that include us sharing the episode notes. Because of support from our listeners, we've been able to keep the show free and make cooler episodes like this one. Or you can make a one-time donation through PayPal on our website. A big Field Guides thank you to Tracy T. and Mark B. for their generous donations in January. And don't forget that we have Field Guides merch available through our website store at thefieldguidespodcast.com. And remember, if you can't financially support the podcast, you can help out by sharing it with friends and family and by subscribing and leaving us a review wherever you get our podcasts. It helps spread the word and allows us to reach a wider audience. We'd like to thank our newest iTunes reviewer, NC Gieslin or NCG Eastlin. Well, either way, come enjoy our periodic posts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you can always email us ideas for episode topics, criticisms, or your own stories of personal encounters with the Florida man to the fieldguides@gmail.com. So this must have been something that came up in the episode, and I'm looking forward to finding out myself. All right, so thank you guys, and here's Violet with the list of our top patrons.
Charcuterie, Eric, Alyssa, Adam, the Hebranks, Mary R., Dr. Judy, Sung, Kimberly B., Peter, Callie, Jessica D., Orange Julianne, Daniel M., Diane, we named the dog Indy, JJ Cathay, Dwayne H., Jonathan A., Dennis, Leslie H., Jeff S., Colin G., M. Tulin, Brant S., Jonathan K., Matt E., Plants in My Pants, Sean M., Sophie S., Connor H., Measure and Principal, Fragaria Pepoloinoidea, Outside Chronicles, Andrew C., Brandon R., Quixote, Robert P., Max D., Jake M., Melissa Marie in Dusty, Arizona, Sarah S., Helen A., MD, Judy F., Ben C., Jane H., Doodle Dude 82, Kazzies, Esther C., John W., Mark V., Bethany, Rob M.
Nice job.
Thank you.
We had a little trouble with the giggles first time around.
Yeah.
Patrons, on behalf of myself, Daniel, and Steve,
And me.
and Violet, we want to say a huge thank you for making this episode possible and all of our other episodes possible as well. We really do appreciate each and every one of you for your support, and we will see you next time.
Goodbye.